When Catherine's vindictive stepfather illegally sells her mountain sanctuary, she returns home to fight for what's hers only to uncover buried secrets, corporate greed, and a truth her mother died protecting. In a race against time, betrayal turns deadly, alliances ignite, and love surfaces in the last place she expected. Some places aren't just land, they're battlegrounds. And some battles change everything. The phone buzzed insistently in my pocket, jolting me out of my focus. I wiped the sweat from my brow, stepping out of the makeshift clinic into the searing midday sun. Shadows stretched long across the dry earth of the rural village, where the scent of heat and dust clung to everything. The name on the screen made my stomach drop. Richard. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. Years of dealing with my stepfather's manipulations had taught me that no message from him brought peace. But curiosity, or maybe the stubborn remnants of hope, urged me to answer. "Hello," I said, forcing neutrality into my voice. "Catherine." His tone was bright, far too cheerful. It immediately raised my guard. "Just thought you'd want to know I sold the mountain cabin." I froze. "You did what?" My voice cracked with disbelief. "Sold it," he repeated, like it was the most normal thing in the world. "Don't look so shocked. It's for the greater good, mine." A smug laugh followed, one I could practically see forming on his smug, weathered face. I tightened my grip on the phone. Richard had always had a way of wrapping destructive choices in casual charm. "You had no right," I said, my voice shaking. "Relax," he said. "I've been managing things while you're off saving the world. And let's be honest, you're never there to enjoy it. It helped clear a few debts. You'll thank me someday." "I'll thank you when hell freezes over," I snapped, ending the call. My heart pounded as I stood beneath the open sky, fury clouding my vision. He'd gone too far. The cabin wasn't just a vacation spot, it was a piece of me. Nestled high in the Blue Ridge Mountains, it had been my sanctuary. A place I rebuilt with my best friend Laura. A place where childhood memories still breathed through the wooden walls and the scent of pine. And Richard saw it as a disposable asset. A poker chip to pay off another round of gambling debts. But what he didn't know, what I intended to keep close to my chest, was that the cabin wasn't entirely mine to sell. Laura was the co-owner, and our legal agreement required both signatures. This wasn't over. I called Laura that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills. "Richard sold the cabin," I said as soon as she picked up. A long silence. "He what?" "He said it helped settle debts. But we both know he can't legally do that. Our co-ownership agreement makes it invalid unless I sign," she finished, her voice cool and sharp. "That bastard." "Exactly. Can you pull up the paperwork? I want to be ready when I get home." "Already on it," she said. "We'll handle this together." I hung up, feeling a flicker of something like control return. I wasn't a helpless teenager anymore. Richard had underestimated me, and that mistake would cost him. The next 3 days passed in a blur of farewells and final shifts at the clinic. My time in Uganda had changed me, given me purpose and drive, but now all I could think about was the fight waiting at home. Late one evening, I took out the leather-bound journal I always traveled with. The pages were filled with fragments of thoughts, patients' names, and memories too precious to let fade. As I wrote, memories of the cabin poured out, the scent of cedar. Nights reading by the stone fireplace. Laura and I are painting the porch while laughing about our failures in love. The cabin was more than a building. It was my lifeline. Laura called the morning of my flight. "You were right," she said. "The agreement is airtight. He can't sell without my written consent. There's no transfer in the county records either." It might have been some kind of under-the-table deal. Of course it was. That was Richard's style. Charm and cheat his way into people's trust. "We need to get ahead of this," I said. "Can you start contacting a lawyer?" "I'll be home in 12 hours. Already started." "Buckle up, Kathy. We're going to war." By the time I landed in Atlanta, I was wired with caffeine and adrenaline. I drove straight to my apartment, dropped off my bags, and then made the long drive. Up to the cabin, the mountain roads were still familiar. Every twist, every dip, every tree-lined curve, but something felt different. When I arrived, The cabin was empty but not untouched. The front porch light had been unscrewed. A drawer in the kitchen hung open, and a glass had been left on the mantel, half full. I wasn't alone, or at least, I hadn't been. Richard had been here, and he'd made himself at home. My phone buzzed. Richard. Of course. Welcome home, Globetrotter, he said as I answered. Figured you'd show up eventually. You've got some nerve. Oh, Catherine, always so dramatic. Look, I just needed quick cash. The buyer paid in cash. The deal's done. No, it's not. Laura and I own this place together. You forged your way through a fake sale. There was a pause. You don't want to do this, he said, his voice tightening. You don't want to escalate. Try me. He hung up, and that's when I knew he wasn't just reckless. He was hiding something bigger. The next morning, I walked through the cabin with Laura, who'd arrived overnight. We documented everything: photos, receipts, and mail left behind. She handed me a folder with our original contract, now digitized and notarized. We send this to a lawyer today, she said. I also called a detective I know in the county. He's willing to take a look. My pulse kicked up. We weren't just pushing back. We were building a case. I thought of Richard's voice. Too calm, too quick to back down. He was afraid. And if Richard was afraid, it meant we were closer to something he didn't want uncovered, something far more dangerous than a forged property sale. It rained the morning we sent the cease and desist letter. Fat, heavy drops pelted the pine trees as Laura and I sat at the kitchen table with steaming mugs of coffee and a laptop between us. The letter was clear, forceful, and unrelenting. Richard had no legal grounds for his so-called sale. It was over for him, at least on paper. You want to press send? Laura asked. I hesitated for a heartbeat, then nodded. Send it. She clicked the mouse. It was done. A strange quiet filled the room, after the kind that only comes once you've stood up to a ghost from your past. But even as we celebrated our small legal victory, something gnawed at me. Richard wasn't the type to retreat quietly. His silence now felt like the calm before a storm. That evening, I stepped out onto the porch, letting the smell of wet pine fill my lungs. The mountain had always been a place of healing, a steady pulse of peace. But now I watched a forest edge with wary eyes, like it might whisper secrets I hadn't yet heard. The next morning, Detective Miller called. Miss Daniels, I reviewed your file and the attached documents. This is solid. You and Miss Langley have a clear case. I'll speak with the supposed buyer today. Do we know who it is yet? I asked. Not yet, he replied. But Richard's been evasive in interviews before. Something tells me this isn't just about debt. I paused. What do you mean? Call it a hunch. I'll keep you updated. I ended the call and settled. If Richard had sold or tried to sell the cabin under a pretense, who was buying? And more importantly, why? Laura leaned against the doorway, sensing my unease. He's hiding something, I said aloud. He always is, she replied. But this feels different. We decided to take a drive down to the county recorder's office ourselves. If the buyer's name wasn't in the official record, we'd dig through Richard's known associates. Someone out there knew more than we did. The drive down the mountain was slick with mist. I watched raindrops streak across the windshield as Laura kept her eyes on the winding road. You ever regret it? She asked suddenly. Buying this place with me? I turned to her, surprised. Not once. Why? She shrugged. Just thinking about how much we've been through here. It's like the cabin draws chaos sometimes. It draws life, I said quietly. The good and the bad, but always the truth. She smiled at that. The recorder's office. We searched public filings, narrowed down real estate entries from the last month, and found a name. Nathan Hale. Laura squinted at the screen. Why does that sound familiar? I pulled out my phone and searched for the name. My blood went cold. Nathan Hale was a mid-tier investor with ties to a shadowy firm called Hailstone Acquisitions, a firm known for acquiring properties near proposed commercial development zones. Most of their purchases were made quietly, often just before new zoning laws changed and values skyrocketed. He's not just a buyer, I said. He's a land shark. We stared at the screen in silence. Laura sat back, slowly. So either Richard got wind of something, or he was tipped off, and tried to sell the cabin out from under us before we could find out. I suddenly felt sick. We returned to the cabin that evening, files in hand, our suspicions growing. The storm outside had passed, but the air felt heavy, charged. Later that night, I sat alone by the fireplace, flipping through an old journal Mom had left behind, something I hadn't touched since she died. Inside was a map, hand-drawn, markings in her handwriting, trails, water lines, geological notes. One phrase underlined twice. Mineral vein unconfirmed. Do not discuss. I stared at it for a long time. Richard didn't just want the cabin, he wanted what was beneath it. The next morning dawned cold and quiet. The kind of hush that settled over the mountain only when something was about to shift. I sat on the porch steps, the map from Mom's journal open across my lap. The words mineral vein unconfirmed, do not discuss, echoed like a drumbeat in my skull. Laura came outside with 2 mugs of coffee and handed one to me. She crouched down to get a better look at the map. You think your mom knew what was under this place? I nodded slowly. She was a geologist before she married Richard. These notes, she must have found something, or suspected it, and Richard must have known. I finished, or found the journal after she died. Laura ran a hand through her hair, then stood up, pacing. If there's mineral wealth under this cabin, Hailstone isn't just a buyer. They're after a resource. I folded the map carefully, and Richard tried to sell the land before we could find out. Later that afternoon, Detective Miller called with an update. Miss Daniels, the buyer Nathan Hale, was less than forthcoming. But he confirmed that Hailstone was prepared to fast-track exploratory permits once the property changed hands. He implied there were rumors. Rumors about what? Rare earth minerals, Miller said, used in tech manufacturing, worth millions. My stomach twisted. So this wasn't just about Richard clearing his gambling debts. No, the detective said flatly, it's about profit. After I hung up, Laura and I got to work. We scanned and preserved every document in Mom's journal, cross-referencing it with public geological surveys and zoning maps. The deeper we dug, the more things didn't add up. 2 parcels adjacent to our land had already been bought quietly by Hailstone months ago. No public disclosures, no press. They've been surrounding us, Laura whispered, preparing. Then, 2 nights later, something changed. I woke to the sound of tires crunching gravel. Laura met me in the hallway, her face pale. We peeked through the window. A dark SUV sat idling near the edge of the driveway. No one got out. Do you think it's him? She whispered. It's not Richard, I said. He drives a beat-up sedan. We waited. 5 minutes. 10. The SUV finally backed out, disappearing into the trees. The next morning, we found boot prints in the mud, leading toward the cabin and then away again. That day, we met with Detective Miller in town. You're being watched, he confirmed, which means you're closer than they want you to be. I've opened a formal inquiry into Hailstone's activity in this county. But you need to be careful. He paused. Then, something shifted in his tone. Off the record, I used to work in federal land protection. These firms, they don't just buy. They break things, people, reputations. We drove back in silence. Every tree branch looked like a camera. Every shadow felt like a warning. Back at the cabin, Laura sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by papers. What if there is something under here? Something big? I swallowed. Then we expose it. We go public. We make noise. That night, I wrote an anonymous email to a journalist contact from my NGO work, someone who'd helped expose a mining scandal overseas. I included scans of the journal pages, zoning maps, and links to the Hailstone acquisitions. The next day, I got a reply. This is huge. I'm flying out. Don't say a word to anyone else. 3 days later, her name, Maya Torres, showed up in my inbox with flight details. The same night, Laura's car alarm blared at a.m. We ran outside. The tires had been slashed. A message was carved into the windshield. Sell or bleed. We filed another police report. Miller had a patrol drive by every hour. But fear hung thick in the air. That night, Laura curled up on the couch, her eyes wide and sleepless. I sat beside her, heart pounding. "This is more than we signed up for," she whispered. "I know." She turned to look at me, something raw in her expression. "But I'd do it all again. For this place. For you." Her words hit something deep. I reached for her hand, the weight of all we'd survived settling into the space between us. The years of friendship, the pain, the fight, the trust. "Me too," I said, and in that fragile, charged silence, we didn't kiss. Not yet. But something shifted. Something honest and terrifying and beautifully overdue. The next morning, Maya arrived, with cameras, questions, and a fire in her eyes. And just as we began giving her the full story, Detective Miller called again. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Richard's gone. His apartment is empty. His phone's off. Gone. Disappeared. And someone's been asking about you both in town. A man in a suit. No name. No business card." Something cold settled in my spine. The battle wasn't over. It was about to erupt. Maya Torres arrived with a purpose and a backpack full of camera gear. She stepped into the cabin like it was a war zone, and maybe in a way it was. Her eyes scanned everything. The stacked documents, the map pinned on the wall, the slashed windshield still parked in the gravel. "Someone's scared," she muttered. "That's when they're most dangerous." She set up a small interview space in front of the fireplace. For the next 3 hours, Laura and I poured out the story from the forged sale to the mineral map, the anonymous threats, and the corporate trail. Maya listened without interrupting, her recorder always rolling. "You're sitting on a potential environmental and political bombshell," she said finally. "This isn't just a mining story. This is corruption, intimidation, and a cover-up." We nodded. We already knew, but hearing it from someone with national credentials made it real. Outside, the trees rustled in the wind. Somewhere down the ridge, a hawk screeched overhead. The mountain listened quietly, holding its breath with us. That evening, while Maya reviewed her footage, Laura sat beside me on the porch swing. The sunset threw streaks of blood orange across the valley. "I keep thinking about that message on my windshield," she said softly. "Sell or bleed." That wasn't just a threat. It was a timeline. I reached for her hand. "They think they can scare us. They don't know how much this place means to us." She looked at me then, and this time, the silence between us broke. No more words, just a moment, and the kiss that finally arrived, gentle at first, then full of everything we hadn't said. Later that night, Laura slept in my arms for the first time in years, not out of fear, but out of something deeper: trust, love, purpose. We were no longer just defending a piece of land. We were fighting for a future we hadn't dared name until now. But peace was fleeting. Just after midnight, the cabin lights flickered. We sat up in the dark, the generator buzzed twice, then died. In the eerie quiet, a car door slammed. We ran to the window. A black sedan. A man is approaching the porch. Tall, suit-clad, face obscured by a hat in the shadows of night. Laura grabbed the baseball bat we kept near the door. I grabbed my phone. The man knocked once. Loud. "Catherine Daniels," he called through the door. "You're making a mistake. Walk away, and this all disappears." I didn't reply. He waited, then turned and left. No violence, no breaking in, just a message. Detective Miller was at the cabin by sunrise. We showed him the footage from Maya's camera, which had caught the tail end of the visit. "That man's not from Hailstone directly," Miller said grimly. "He's a contractor. They use third parties to pressure landowners into compliance." "Off the books." Maya's face hardened. "Not anymore. This story's going live tomorrow." She packed up and left by noon. Her hands shook as she hugged me. "Be careful, Kathy. You're at the heart of this now." That evening, the article hit the internet. Buried wealth, buried threats. A fight for one mountain's soul. It exploded. Local news picked it up. Then national. Comments flooded in. Support, outrage, whispers of investigations. But it wasn't over. 2 days later, we found Richard. Or rather, he found us. He was standing at the edge of the driveway as we returned from a supply run. Dirty, gaunt, eyes wild. "Catherine," he pleaded, "you don't understand. They're after me. They want me dead." Laura stayed behind me. You sold us out, I snapped. You tried to sell this land. You lied. You forged. And you disappeared. I had no choice, he cried. They came to me after your mother died. They said the mountain had value. They promised quick money. I didn't know it would go this far. I stared at him, the man who had caused so much damage, who had tried to erase everything my mother built, and I saw fear, not guilt. Fear. You're going to testify, I said, to everything, or they'll bury you in more than debt. He nodded, shaking. Just protect me. We took him to Miller that night, and within 48 hours, Richard's sworn statement triggered a federal investigation. Hailstone's permits were revoked. Their offices were raided. Nathan Hale vanished overseas. The story closed. But our lives didn't. Weeks later, Laura and I sat on the porch again. Spring had returned. The wildflowers bloomed around the porch, bright and defiant. Maya sent a postcard from Geneva. Your courage sparked a storm. Never forget what you built. I looked at Laura, at the cabin, on the land. At the peace that had finally come, not because it was granted, but because we had claimed it. She squeezed my hand. Think we'll ever be left alone? I smiled. We don't need to be alone, just free. And this time, the mountain agreed.